What is a new world in the making for you?
I really believe in the power of entrepreneurship. And I mean, it's at the core of Carbon 13, but I always believed in the power and the positive potential impact of entrepreneurship.
Can you explain a bit what Carbon 13 actually is?
So Carbon 13 is a venture builder for climate tech startups and an early stage VC fund. Now, we started with the venture builder side. So we first started this program. We actually had an experiment without investing, and we realized, like, look, you can really build something if this matchmaking of founders works, and if you bring great people together, you can really add value here. But we realized in that experiment that without a fund, we don't really have skin in the game. We don't really have enough of a sort of long-term incentive to work with these founders and them to work with us on the other side as well. Is climate tech fundamentally slower?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
But in climate tech, if we want to solve climate change, we can't just have software.
Mm-hmm.
So we need hardware, we need biotech, and hardware and deep tech, as people now call it, it's slower, right? The timelines are different, the financing is different, the amount of money is different, the risk return profile is different, right? Like once I have a hardware business that has IP and that has protection, there's real protection. That also means that you could sell a business earlier, maybe, right? And for VC, that might mean that you have a return earlier. For the climate, it might mean that, that business will pick up this technology and sell it through their channels and do that faster. So it can work. It just works slightly different.
What are these really interesting, exciting innovations that you're seeing?
What I find exciting right now is a lot of these companies at the intersection of AI and science. AI and machine learning is one of these technology shifts that happen or come around every few decades where, we had that with software, with computers. Mobile phone was another moment in time where really things changed, how we build businesses or what kind of things you would build. And AI is another one, right? It changes fundamentally the kind of things you can build, the way you build a company, right?
The aim is to reduce about 10 million tons of CO2, is that right?
Yeah, 10 million tons.
Okay, how do you make that happen?
A lot of complexity in these things. You need to understand and sort of live with this complexity and accept that you really need to think about system boundaries. You need to think about your theory of change, and you need to take these things serious. And when you do, you can build something that is put on a better foundation for the long term.
Hi, and welcome back to New World in the Making, the podcast where we explore the world we're coming from, trying to make sense of the chaos that we're living through right now, and look into the new systems, ideas, and possibilities that are already emerging. So, the New World in the Making. Today, I am incredibly excited to welcome Michael Langguth, co-founder of Carbon 13, a venture builder at the forefront of climate tech innovation. They're one of the leading platforms supporting founders to build actual scalable, high-impact climate ventures. And Michael's work is deeply aligned with what it takes to make climate innovation real, not just as ideas, but really as ventures that launch, scale, and create the systemic change that we so desperately need. We'll be digging into some of the biggest questions shaping climate tech today, what it actually takes to found a climate tech startup, and why the narratives around climate investing sometimes feels a bit slower than it actually might be, and how organizations like Carbon 13 are enabling new possibilities for founders, investors, and innovators across the sector. So, let's dive in. Michael, thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to be here today. Thank you.
Me too. I'm very excited. And maybe before we go into all the Carbon 13, everything what you do with that, could you share a little bit? How did you get actually into founding Carbon 13 and what led you to this?
Yeah, sure. So I co-founded the company, but I was a late co-founder in the sense that the team had partially already come together. And I joined when they had a landing page. They had thoughts about a business plan, but they hadn't really started any programs yet. They didn't have a fund yet, which is a big part of what we do. And Yeah, I mean, for me, my personal story is so that I had one software company doing my undergrads, which failed quite soon. We kind of gave it up. We sold the platform for a few €100, but like it really, yeah, it really just didn't work so well. But it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot about how to start a software business, how to start a business. That was in the Netherlands. So we incorporated a business and made some money. My second business was a lot more successful. We had it over 10 years. But yeah, that led me to this idea of, okay, how do I get into a third business that is more in climate tech? But I was looking for a co-founder, and I found this website that my co-founders had put up, which is basically saying, if you're a software founder or if you're a founder that knows how to build companies on the commercial side, we have these scientists for you from Cambridge. And yeah, I basically applied, and they said, "Well, there isn't a program yet, but you can join and build it."
Wow, that's crazy. Okay, cool. And then so you pivoted the whole idea of like actually building your own climate tech startup to then just becoming this founder here.
Yeah, pretty soon. I mean, I have to say that I really had. The funny thing is that I don't think I've ever told this to anyone. I had a coach over a few years in the last years of my previous business, sort of like year 8, 9, and 10. And a lot of what we were talking about was sort of like my values and what is important for me in life and what do I want to achieve. I really recommend founders doing that either before starting a business, but like it sort of informed for me what I wanted to do next. And these we created these 3 circles that were overlapping, and it was working with early stage founders. It was sustainability or climate tech, and investing in some way, shape, or form. So when I heard about the idea of what Chris, Nikki, and the others were doing at the time, for me it was like, oh wow, yeah, this is perfectly in the middle of these 3 circles. So yeah, I was very excited pretty much from the get go. And maybe in 20 years I do another startup.
Congrats for arriving to these 3 circles because I think we are all quite like a lot of times lost in understanding what do we actually want. How did you get to understanding that you were interested in working with early stage founders and sustainability in
Mm,
the first place?
mm. Yeah, I mean, there's the one side, the sustainability. To be honest, I always wanted to do something in the space, and like the only ever job I had was for Ashoka, an organization that supports social enterprises. And in those, the most interesting startups for me or companies were the sustainability ones. The other element was that actually doing my bachelor, I wrote my bachelor thesis after hearing of Ashoka for the first time about this idea of, can you teach entrepreneurship to students? And yeah, we wrote this course book with my advisor, and it's actually being taught, or was taught at least, a few years after I finished. So that was environmental and social entrepreneurship at University Maastricht. Um, so that was the other bit. I then took a very different turn because I started a technology business or software business. And that was mostly because I met this amazing software engineer doing my master thesis. And I sort of fell into the software side more than really planned. But I always had this passion. And actually, our first business plan for POC, my second business, said that Michael's going to do this for 3 to 5 years, and then he's going to start a social or an environmental enterprise.
Yes.
Funny enough, our investors at the time I think they never read our business plan, because otherwise they would have had some doubts on like my commitment to this. Um, but yeah, I mean, sustainability has always been a passion of mine. But I never really had an idea in the space. So yeah, when this came around, it was really just a sort of perfect match.
Okay, love it. Okay, so then how did you start then Carbon 13? I mean, I can imagine it is quite a big thing. I mean, you need to get founders and also investors to actually back this whole thing and make it what it is today. Maybe can you explain a bit what Carbon 13 actually is, and then also go back into the beginnings of it?
100%. Yeah. I mean, so Calm13 is a venture builder for climate tech startups, and an early stage VC fund. Now we started with the venture builder side. So we um, first started this program. We actually had an experiment without investing, and we realized, like, look, you can really build something if this matchmaking of founders works, and if you bring great people together, you can really add value here. But we realized in that experiment that without a fund, we don't really have skin in the game. We don't really have enough of a sort of long-term incentive to work with these founders, and them to work with us on the other side as well. So that was end of 2020, and we decided to launch our first program, which originally was meant to be fully in person, but it was during COVID, so that wasn't possible. And we then very quickly, over several months, decided that we were going to do like a program, kick it off in like virtually, and then as soon as we could come together, we would do in person. And yeah, the first cohort was a real success. We raised the money. I think at the time, climate tech was like a big topic. A lot of investors, a lot of people sort of came out of this lockdown and were like, okay, I need to do something with my life. I want to have a positive impact. And I think that was part of the reason why climate tech was such a hot topic in, 2021, 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah, we were in many ways really at the right time in the right place. We probably should have used that to right away raise a lot more money for the model. We decided to go with these microfunds in the UK, which has been really great for us. And it really helped us sort of connect angel investors to the startups. But yeah, now we're currently raising a bigger fund. And given the global climate, it's maybe not the easiest. People say it's one of the hardest times to raise money, but we are making really good progress, and we're going to close a fund later this year.
Okay. Really looking forward to that. And so you were already mentioning that you're having this program for co-founders to find each other. So how do you do that? What's the formula to actually succeed? Because I mean, some when you spend more time with your co-founders than you with your spouses, it's a big right. Like it's
Yeah.
like you're finding something. So yeah, can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's founding a business is an interesting process, right? Like you're looking for a partner that would be with you for the next 10 years, and you need to enjoy working with them, spending, like you said, a lot of time with them. Like at the end of my second startup, POC, I
Yeah,
knew how my co-founder, like how his facial expression changes when he was getting hungry, or like the kind of like times he would need to have food so that we could have a good meeting around sort of 1 p.m.
I love that.
So like it's a really interesting relationship, right? This co-founding relationship, like because on you can't also it's really hard to break that up, especially after a while. And you need to be able to solve problems. Like in many ways, it's very comparable to a relationship with a sort of a loving love relationship, but you don't have to necessarily be best friends. But I think in many cases people become that because you spend so much time together and you go through difficult times together. Um, so what we decided early on is that it's really important to help founders to set that relationship on a good foundation. So like really put some of the difficult questions to the front so that people talk about like what are their financial needs? How do you actually think about like do you like working late? How do you think about working on the weekend? What do you do when this and that happened? Like trying to stress test this relationship early on hopefully sets you up to better success. You also need really good legal documentation because things happen, right? Like the reality is, I would say about a third, a bit less of that maybe, of the teams break up at some point. Maybe not in the first 6 months, but over the first 3 years, I would say. And that is fine if you have the right documentation. And oftentimes it's not necessarily antagonistic. It's not necessarily like we had a massive fight, but one person just realizes like, look, I'm moving with my family to another country. I can't do this anymore. We had a situation where a founder was, she's Ukrainian, and her family at the beginning of the war asked her to come home. And like these kind of situations happen. Somebody gets sick. And that's not it's not something that you can, like, you need to be able to deal with that. And the company needs to survive, right? And if you do that, yeah, then I think you can have a better success. And then there's obviously how do you optimize for the growth, for the success. And that's a lot around like setting yourself up with the right mindset around customers, the right mindset around investors, around grants, and so on.
Wow. Okay. And do you help then the founders as well to find the ideas, and how does the process work? Because do you work also with mentors like you did, or how does that process work of like creating then also the startup itself?
Yeah, I mean the first phase, what we call the teaming phase, is really these two elements. So on the one hand, the matchmaking of the founders. On the other hand, it's sort of ideation. Like it's very difficult to tell people like, look, you should, and we try, like you should look at the person and not necessarily at the topic that you want to work on. I mean, it worked for me in my last startup. Like, I met this amazing software engineer. He was in part of my program. His name was Oyvind. And then over time, we realized something we wanted to work on. And with some of our teams, that has worked amazingly well, right? Like, and maybe that's some of the stable teams that we have. But then there's also like, hey, I want to work on this topic. You want to work on this topic. Let's figure this out. Oftentimes, we have these groups of maybe 10 people or 15 people that all want to work on, let's say, seaweed, or they want to work on something around energy, and they come together and then sort of do these group brainstormings. And I think that can be incredibly powerful from, you have a CERN physicist, and then you have an energy trader, and then you have this investor, and then you have this consultant, and all of them bring these different insights to the table. And the group brainstorming then is really, really powerful. And that's the sort of ideation part. But that happens still during phase two. So at the end of phase one, you need to be in a team. I would say about 60, 70% end up in a team. Right now we have a cohort where I think it's even 80%. Um, so we have something like 25 to 30 teams at the end of, or at the beginning of phase two. Some of those teams, when they then start really talking to customers, they realize like, look, it doesn't work with us. And that's fine, right? Oftentimes, founders that are really committed, they find a third team or a second team that they might have been also speaking to. So there's always this breaking up. We used to always have a session called "Breaking Up is Hard to Do," but it's something that you need to do, right? Like if you realize like us doesn't work,
Yeah.
there might still be 78 other people where there could be a fit. And then we connect the founders not just with the cohort in Germany, but also with the cohort in Cambridge. So, and the other way around. So you have not just 80 people in your cohort, but suddenly there's another 80 people in another cohort
Okay.
where you could also be co-founding with. So the pool is actually really large, and you just need to make sure that everybody knows you know everybody, and you have some feeling about a small number of people where you really have then give it the first go, and then maybe later you join another team.
Okay. And what do you feel is their motivation? Like what's driving them? I mean, obviously sustainability, climate I guess a major factor, but where are they coming from? What's their background usually? Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And I think that's one of the things that makes us quite different.
Mm.
Actually, let me ask you, what do you think the average age of these people will be?
Ooh, okay. So maybe mid and 20s, I would say.
And that would be correct for most venture builders. So most accelerators, most venture builders, when you look at Entrepreneur First or Antler, I think it's mid-20s actually. They have a lot of people sort of right after their bachelor, and then there's some people right after their masters and so on. The average age income 13 is 37. And that's been the same since 15 cohorts now, both in Cambridge and Berlin.
37. Wow.
People have on average 10 plus years of industry experience or academic experience where they have done a postgraduate degree and so on, right? Like
Yeah.
generally the people in our program tend to have sort of are 37, they tend to have two kids. They tend to have had a first career where they know how to make money. And that's not necessarily the question anymore. Now the question is, how do I often, I've heard this so many times, it sounds a bit sort of
Okay.
too ideological, but like, um, how do I look into my kids' eyes in 10 years when they ask me what I have done when, the world was at its precipice and I already knew how to make money? It's not like, right, that's not the question. Like you know how to survive, you know how to have a job and be successful in it. But can you have a job or at a startup that also has an impact that is making a difference in the world?
Right. Okay. Okay. Beautiful. Wow.
And then, I mean, you asked about sort of demographics. We have a lot of scientists. About 38% on average have a PhD. Quite a large number have started a business before. Often not necessarily like a scale up,
Mhm.
like a startup where they have raised funding, but oftentimes people would have started an agency or something similar. Um, University connections. I would say all the top universities like Cambridge, Oxford, TUM in Germany, the KIT, the ETH, and so on. So all the big universities. Right now, we have more people from Germany and the UK, obviously, but our third biggest group is French. Then I would say almost Spanish already. The Netherlands, the Nordic countries.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And okay, so during these 8 months is the program, no? The whole of it. Um, are they are there is there any way that they can sustain themselves on something else? Like, or is it like, okay, you for 8 months you're gonna be committing 100% to this, and you're supposed to be I don't know, living off your savings or something. I don't know. Uh,
Yeah, it's a really good point. And this is actually a learning I would say that we had. So on the one hand, you want people that are fully committed, right? You're looking for intentionality that is really like, I want to start a business and I want to start it now. Ideally, in some cases, people have started working on X already. They bring an idea, they bring in maybe an MVP or some IP. I mean, obviously, that's easier when you come from academia, but yeah. So in terms of sustaining yourself, something that we noticed is that we had more dropouts of female participants in that phase too. So first of all, the 8 month is split into 4 months before investment and months after. So at the middle, we invest. So then, the business has 150,000 euros and you can pay yourself from that.
right.
Um, yeah, the first 4 months, what we saw is that, especially in that sort of phase two, even promising founding teams, where a female participant would be more likely to drop out. And I think that's because women are more likely to, if something at home isn't necessarily financially, financials are a bit tight, are more likely to drop out and then stay at home and take care of the kids. So to solve that, we have started a bursary program for underrepresented founders, where you can apply for bursary and then you get paid several thousand euros a month. But you do need to show us that you need it.
Need it.
Very early on, we used to pay people to do the program, but then it's really hard to pay 80 individuals times two for several months. Like it's such a huge cost. And what we realized is that a lot of these people don't necessarily need the money. Like a lot of been saving up to this point where they're like, I want to start a business. I've been saving, or maybe they had an exit, they sold a business. And we were paying people that, in some cases asked us, can you pay me later? Because right now my tax is too high. And I was like, okay, this is
You're not.
right. So we switched it to like, you need to tell us that you need it and then we can pay you something. And we have a partnership for that with Siemens Energy Ventures. Yeah, Kendra, the managing partner of Siemens Energy Ventures, she's very much amazing, as well as the team, Mandy and Trent. They're really behind this of supporting female founders into climate tech.
Okay, fascinating. Okay, that's a very good point. And from a more investment perspective, how you already mentioned it's maybe a little bit of a different moment right now about, well, everything that's going on in the world. But how do you sell green tech, and how is it now perceived from an investor's perspective?
hmm
Is
I
it
mean, the world hasn't changed so much. And actually, I would say it's changing back right now. I can really feel that 2026 is different to 2025 or 2024. We did have this huge, like, one of the problems of VC is that you have these hype cycles, right? Like something is incredibly on vogue, everybody wants to do it, and then everybody invests in a certain space, and then there's this sort of lull afterwards where it's like, oh, and now I have made all these investments, and maybe some of them don't work out. I don't want to double down on this thing. We believe that, especially with climate, well, the unfortunate thing is that it won't go away, right? We haven't solved climate change only because we're now everybody's on ChatGPT. Climate change isn't going away. We do have a chance of solving it, but we will have to do something for that. And these companies that do something, I think they will be a lot more valuable in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, because they fundamentally solve a problem of decarbonization for a corporate that might not do so much now, but they will do a lot more in 5 to 10 years. And I mean, regulatory change is also coming slowly into the space, right? We have more carbon credit trading schemes. We have more. The European Union launched CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism. There's more regulation coming in that direction. So these companies will be more valuable in the next few years, and these topics will be more interesting. Having said that, energy as part of climate tech is a huge topic, and I would almost say some areas of climate tech might be impact, but energy really isn't. Like, right, like it's just cheaper to deploy solar and wind, and battery prices have come down so far, and long duration energy storage is coming around. And there's so many topics where it just makes sense for any corporate buyer to have their own solar, to have their own storage, and solve them for themselves to be independent and have cheaper energy.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. But like, okay, I want to go back to the investing aspect as well. But now that we're talking about this, um, why do you think that we don't see enough all these new innovations? Like, I mean, there's so much happening. You are at the forefront seeing all the innovations. Don't you get sometimes frustrated of like, okay, this would be great to see it at
Mm.
scale, and like, why is this not everywhere already? You know?
It's a really funny one. I have said to my partner many times that, like, if the general public could just see what I'm seeing, like see all these amazing people doing these amazing startups, and they're growing quickly. They're not yet the size of Google. Like, we don't have many businesses that size, but across Europe, there's more business, more and more people, and across the world, really. And yeah, it's just a bit of a shame that the media is more. It works better to have negative news, right? Like something that sort of is shocking is always better than, hey, look, we've actually solved 10% of the emissions of cows, or we have solved 10% of the emissions, or 20% of the energy grid, and so on. It's just the way I think the news works. Partially, it's also new. Some of these things will be bigger, or some of these companies will be bigger in a few years. Not many people know about, like, the huge rise in Germany, across Europe, of heat pumps and the installation of solar. And there's some companies that are really valuable, quite large by now, so hundreds of millions of revenue, and growing very quickly still. Octopus Energy in the UK, obviously now a European-wide sort of energy provider, as well as Enpal and 1,5 Grad in Germany. These are really great businesses, and they have been built over the last, not like many decades, like I think over the last 10 years. And there are these examples. They're just not as sort of much in the media as maybe Google or Amazon is.
Right. And like in terms of infrastructure, do you think there is a mismatch also of infrastructure, or like not enough capital still going into that direction? Or what is still kind of, the barrier for this mass adoption? Or is it just that we are just not aware of it and we think this is not happening or this is not possible, or I don't know.
Mhm. I mean, infrastructure is being changed. It just takes a long time. And we don't really look at incremental changes so much. But
Mm.
like, I mean, I've heard now many times of people in Spain saying, like we should be the energy powerhouse of Europe. We should be, the
Yes.
Saudi Arabia in terms of energy of Europe. Like we have so much solar, so much wind. And that's happening, right? Like the number of Northern European startups that need a lot of energy around the hydrogen space or similar spaces that are putting their plants here in Spain is very large. It's just not something, again, that's sort of necessarily being talked about.
Right.
And there's still big barriers. It's just that the funny thing of politics right now, it does seem like the powers that be, i.e., the old school energy companies, the old school oil and gas companies, they have a lot of power, and they're using that power to slow the change down and to slow slow the willingness of politicians to finance these newer technologies. Because, like in Germany, for example, there's this plan to invest huge amounts of money into gas turbines for energy production. Where if you took the same money and put it into energy storage,
Right.
you would almost be there, right? Like it's quite interesting, and I do think that's partially because of lobbying of the big energy companies that just make more money from oil and gas.
Yeah. I mean, also the automobile industry, like cars, like Germany is built on that. So if we don't have that anymore, I mean, it makes sense in a way that
Yeah.
yeah,
It makes sense, but it's just interesting because you're slowing something down that everybody knows is going to happen.
it needs
And
to happen.
but yeah, you do need time for the transition. I do see that. Like the unfortunate thing is that in German we have this word Zulieferbetrieb, so a company that creates part of the engine, for example, of a car, and or the like the yeah part of the Fuhrwerk, so the thing that sort of pushes forward the car. Um, like some of these things we don't need in an electric car, unfortunately. The number of parts in an electric car is a lot smaller, and we don't have the in-house or in Europe capabilities to create batteries. So there's certain things that you need that we don't have right now. And there's other things that we really have and we have built and we have optimized over the last 100 years that you don't need anymore. So there is a big shift, and we need to not forget the people that, are working in these jobs. We need to find ways to in some cases retrain them. Like on the other hand, we have a huge need for more installation companies for solar and heat pumps in the countryside of Germany. It's really hard to get somebody to install your solar battery and heat pump into your residential home. Right? There is jobs that are needed, but we need to help people switch.
Yeah. Okay, so going into investing in these innovative startups again, is it sometimes a hard sell? Like, is it sometimes also that we need to maybe have to see maybe a lower return rate at the beginning? Is it something that you need to kind of educate investors and also have another understanding of timings for investing? Is there something of that there?
So, so the interesting thing is, I think we are in this discussion often mixing up two different topics. Like, is climate tech fundamentally slower?
Yeah.
No,
Okay.
but in climate tech, if we want to solve climate change, we can't just have software.
Hmm.
So we need hardware, we need biotech, and hardware and or deep tech, as people now call it, it's slower, right? That's the thing. And there isn't so many over the last 30 years in Europe.
Mm.
There aren't that many hardware deep tech funds that have been very successful compared to the software focused VC funds, right? VC essentially has gotten big by investing almost solely in software. I didn't know any when I started my last business, there wasn't any hardware, almost any hardware companies. They were all software companies. Either you were doing consumer or you were doing B2B. But almost no one did hardware. And now people have to go back to this sort of concept of hardware investing. And the timelines are different, the financing is different, the amount of money is different, the risk return profile is different, right? Like once I have a hardware business that has IP and that has protection, there's real protection versus a software business, which you don't really ever have that kind of there's no patenting of software, but there is patenting of hardware. So there is ways to protect yourself. Um, that also means that you could sell a business earlier, maybe, right? Like you don't need to necessarily have 100 million in revenue to show SAP that, your company is really working. If your patent is really strong and you have a pilot facility and a big corporate is like, look, this works. Like the R&D team, like what they have figured out works. We haven't done this. Should we just acquire the company early? That's possible. And for VC, that might mean that you have a return earlier. For the climate, it might mean that that business will pick up this technology and sell it through their channels and do that faster. So it can work. It just works slightly different.
Mm. Okay. Yeah. No, no. That's a very good point and a very good clarification to like understand also why sustainability sometimes is kind of connected to that idea of like no, it's slower. Doesn't necessarily has to be like this, but it's that word.
We have software businesses who are scaling really fast,
Mm.
like any other software business.
Right.
But
Yeah.
um, it's just software versus hardware, not necessarily climate tech versus everything else.
Right. No, very good distinction. And what are these really interesting, exciting innovations that you're seeing? What would be something that's like this is what we should look out for?
I think fundamentally what I find exciting right now is a lot of these companies at the intersection of AI and science.
Right.
Um, like we are like AI and machine learning is I would say, one of these technology shifts that happen or come around every few decades where, we had that with software, with computers. Mobile phone was another moment in time where really things changed how we build businesses or what kind of things you would build. And AI is another one, right? It changes fundamentally the kind of things you can build, the way you build a company, right? Like everything, if you start a business now, you're going to start AI first. You're not going to start, building software and then think about how do I integrate AI. You're going to maybe even just use a lovable to build your first MVP, and it takes you days, and it doesn't even need a software engineer. But some of our commercial founders have launch these platforms in a number of days, um, which is amazing, and it really changes the way we can change businesses, and that's sort of at the fundamental layer. But then there's also hard sciences can right well in the past were very much sort of trial and error, right? Like if you're in a lab, you try X and you get it to a point, and then you figure out does it work, does it not work. Yes, you have some other learnings on the way, but fundamentally you have to do it sort of in a linear fashion.
Hmm.
Um, whereas AI can run these simulations, you can create a digital twin of a process and run these simulations, like hundreds of thousands of simulations in one go in a matter of minutes, right? Like it fundamentally changes how we experiment. We have a business called Matnex. They do that for materials discovery, and they were one of the first companies to discover a new type of magnet, which hadn't been done in many decades before. And it's great because the company is now co-developing that material for a use case in wind power. So in wind power, to create the energy from the movement, you use magnets, and that's really great. It's really exciting to have this ability to define a material of a certain, like with these certain criteria, and then come up with something new. And that same thing is happening across many different sciences.
Okay, so you're very hopeful then that we're still in time to to manage all this climate emergency that we have.
I mean, depends how you define in time, but
Okay.
like I fundamentally, a world that is 2 degrees is better than 3.
Mm-hmm.
We're not in time for 1.5 degrees, but 2.5 is still better than 4.5.
Right.
Like, if you think about some of the cities that are on the seashore,
Mm.
a 5-degree world would mean London isn't there anymore, right? Like, there's a real reason why we need to really prevent certain, and I mean, even before that, you have cities that are a bit lower, there where there isn't maybe as much money to put into dams, to put into protection, in Bangladesh or in other places where like already a 3-degree world is really a problem. So besides the fact that it's always the when you go higher in terms of the average, the acceleration sort of on like a special event is even higher. So that's where a lot of the problems come from. But generally, we need to make sure that we stay as low as possible, whatever that number is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, of course. Would be great to like not go into the tipping points that are like well, now
Mm.
there's
Yeah, I mean
that's another
that's an
question.
interesting thought, which I think nobody has really figured out. So yeah.
Right. Yeah. But okay, let's go back into like the more hopeful, innovative stuff that well, you were mentioning I besides that, something else that's like striking you, I don't know, something that maybe has surprised you, something that you're like, oh my gosh, that is just fundamentally just changing a lot of things.
Mm. Good question. I do think 2026 we've seemed to have come over this point where people are really more interested again in climate. I think, especially in Europe, there is a really sort of resurgence of we want to build locally, we want to take care of our energy grid, we want to take care of emissions, and yeah, like the global sort of tensions with the US mean that European companies are sort of maybe going back to some of the basics. And actually, the European stock market has benefited a lot in the last year from the difficulties in the US. And so that means that some of these companies are having some extra capital to invest, and decarbonization often means you're saving material, you're saving energy, you're saving some kind of thing in a process, and that's where I think, or I hope that there's money being spent in that way, and we're having really good conversations right now with different corporates from industries such as energy, fashion, food, where there's a real interest to double down on sort of sustainability and climate tech topics.
Interesting. And from a European now legal perspective, are there any regulations, laws, something that's really pushing something forward? Are you seeing any changes there? Or what are the barriers possibly?
Mm. I mean, since January, CBAM has come into place. It wasn't, and it was a bit of a surprise that it actually started. I think a lot of people were expecting that to be pushed back.
Yeah.
And I think the UK and other countries are now planning to launch a similar system.
Right.
Um, I in different European countries. I mean, I know some of those things. I mean, in German, the Gebäude Dämmungsgesetz, something
Yeah.
like that. There's a law around insulation and energy. I think it's Gebäudeenergiegesetz. That people need to invest or want to also invest in their homes, right? Like the truth is, if you do that, if you invest in insulation, if you invest in clean energies, your bills will come down. There's this concept in the UK of the zero bill home, right? Like
Yeah.
you could have a home, and it's not that hard to have a home with almost zero bills.
Right.
And why would somebody that has a home not want that? I think there's a structural problem where, and I've heard this from my parents and their friends, which is if people are in their 60s, and we have a lot of people in their 60s and 70s
With that.
that
So that.
own homes,
Yeah.
and they're like, am I going to be long enough in this house for me to have the benefit of this? Because yes, it does have a payback of maybe 8 years or 10 years. And I think as young people, if you have parents that live in a home like that, I think you should speak to them and go, look, I really want you to do that, because it will be good for me. And yeah, I mean, obviously, that's a privileged position to be in, where you have parents that maybe own a home like this, like a residential home. But then there's also other places where, pushing that forward, pushing your local politicians. It does make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I mean, like, also with time, even already in the last years, like what you already mentioned, these that the price of solar energy and all that has been going down, and like even the yeah, acquiring all the material, all the things that's needed to install this. I mean, going back just 5 years, it's been like such a massive drop in price, right?
Yeah. I mean, and the installers, right, then they're smart people, right? Like they know there's money to be made, so they have increased their capacity, and that is happening. And like I think 3 years ago when we came out of COVID, a lot of people wanted to have solar and batteries on their roof, and it was maybe more difficult. Now there's a lot more capacity, and there's more capacity being added. I know that, for example, I spoke with a big energy company the other day, and they were quite proud of this investment they had made, which was a platform to train installation companies in France.
Okay.
And
Okay. Cool.
it is being recognized that that's going to be one of the bottlenecks. And I think when I or somebody hears from that, I'm sure there's other people working on the same thing. Or if you're a founder out there and you're hearing that, and your local country doesn't have one of these, you can easily build a platform that helps people to retrain, right? Like there's a lot of people that, yeah, that might be losing their job in a different industry and then retraining and being like even a self-employed solar installator or a self-employed heat pump installation company.
Yeah.
You can make really good money with that.
Yeah. And for somebody, exactly, for somebody that's listening to us right now and would like to start their own startup, and what kind of fields would you like to see more innovation? What are these challenges that you say, like, okay, there's a lot of potential here?
I'm always amazed that I think, yeah, I mean, the one I just mentioned is sort of uh, one of these topics that I would love being solved because it just seems very straightforward. But I think food systems is a very interesting topic, which I think is a little bit more difficult to solve. But like a lot of our emissions come from the way we make food, the way we um, throw away a lot of food, and so on. But yeah, I think energy is getting a lot of attention because there's a lot of, there's a very clear business case. But there's other spaces around the way we make buildings. And it's interesting to me because like you have in software, it might not make sense to start a clone of a company in your local country. But with hardware, like if you look around and I don't know, you're based in Italy, and like there's a lot of these business models that would make sense exactly in the same way, that are being started in the UK or in the US, and taking that, bringing that over, like yes, you might have the chance to sell the company later, but also fundamentally you're making something important, and you're facilitating an important change in your home country, and you're helping overall, right? Like the climate doesn't matter, doesn't care where those emissions are coming from, as long as we bring them down.
Yeah. I mean, I know that you're the idea and target for all these startups that you're helping to fund. They are the aim is to reduce about 10 million tons of CO2. Is that right?
Yeah, 10 million tons.
Okay. How do you assess that? How do you make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, so in the program, every founder goes through carbon intelligence programs. So we have a number of sessions that are led by my co-founder Nikki and another colleague Marina, where we help people understand first of all the complexity of carbon emissions. Right, like for example, we have this exercise, which is a half-day exercise, where it's called the Carbon Coffee Cup Challenge, and it's about, is it better to have a plastic cup, a paper cup, or a reusable cup?
Mm-hmm.
And the funny thing is, it depends. It's not just better to have a reusable cup, because unfortunately, humanity is a little bit lazy. And if we take a hard case cup and then throw it away after 2 times using it, then actually it's worse than if you just had a plastic cup. And there's a lot of complexity in these things, and sort of you need to understand and sort of live with this complexity, and accept that you really need to think about the system boundaries. You need to think about your theory of change, and you need to take these things serious. And when you do, you can build something that is put on a better foundation for the long term.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, we teach our founders a lot of these topics. And then every founder gets a carbon expert in resident, which is sort of an LCA expert that knows how to calculate these things. Ideally, you start yourself. If you start yourself, you can always get better help and you understand some of the difficulties. But yeah, then there's like all of these tools, like data sets globally of like what kind of emissions are there in grid balancing or in sort of regenerative agriculture or so on. And then you start making a calculation that we call the carbon case, which is basically a impact calculation based on your business case. So you look at it from okay, so what is our best case scenario in terms of our sales, and what would that mean in terms of our impact on that system? It's a bit easier if it's like a direct mitigation. So you have a hardware solution that reduces emissions in a certain sector.
Right.
We also invest in enabling platforms where, um, like Tetrax AI is an agentic AI solution that helps solar developers move faster in the first stage due diligence and then also at the later stages. So their impact is helping solar developers go to market with new projects faster.
Mhm. Okay.
The calculation there is slightly different from, what's the normal growth rate and where can we change that behavior through our technology, and that delta between sort of the current and the future intended, if you're successful with your business, that's 10 million tons.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. Okay. Oh, I mean, I already looked into your portfolio of all the startups there, and I was just blown away by all the innovations that are already happening, and I'm really looking forward to seeing all the new ones that you are enabling to being built as well. Um, so where do you see us as the planet and as us as humans developing all these things in 5 to 10 years? I know it's hard because 5 to 10 years is like so much can
I
happen.
mean, if we're successful, we will have built 400. Well, we would have built somewhere around 400 businesses or invested in 400 businesses.
Right.
It built probably more like around 1,000. And, you know, our aim is to solve 1% of global emissions through those startups. We hope that there's 100 other carbon 13s and other initiatives. And I mean, there are, right? There's a lot of different people who are working on this with often a lot more capital. So yeah, I mean, I think we will have a good chance to have made a fundamental dent into the emissions curve. And I mean, I think some predictions are that end of last year was peak CO2 emissions. That because China has come down with their emissions, the rest of the world as a whole has now gone into a curve that is going down. How fast is it going down, and how much of that is then also being sequestered directly from the air, like through carbon capture and so on? Is a question. And but yeah, I do hope that we've made a real difference in some of these areas. To be honest, we started looking into from a strategic perspective, we've slightly moved on from a pure carbon CO2e perspective to this concept of planetary boundaries, where we believe that climate change is the most urgent one of those, but there's other planetary boundaries that we are in risk of sort of going beyond, and they're not hard boundaries in most cases, right? Like microplastics in the sea, in water, it's not a hard. There's there's a really bad part, but like we shouldn't get there ideally. Or water pollution in general, air pollution, and so on. Um, so we are looking at other topic areas beyond sort of GHG.
Okay, love it. Okay, yeah, I mean, the microplastic one also, it's a big one. No? It's yeah. And
Invested in a company called FloatSync, who are sorting that microplastic
mm,
um, from the sea. They're based in Singapore and the UK, and they have a solution that can sort of sort through microplastics straight from the ocean. We have a company called Circular 11, which takes that microplastic and takes the plastic, and I can make something out of it that otherwise couldn't, where the plastic couldn't be recycled. Um, we've invested in quite a few companies in that space, and I think it's something that we will see. The problem there is that there isn't really a business case. Right? Nobody pays for the rubbish right now, unfortunately. But yeah.
well, I mean, like there's like a lot of seaweed, as you were also mentioning in the beginning, seaweed plastics and stuff like that's happening. Yeah, very interested in seeing more of that as well. Since this podcast is called New World in the Making, what is a new world in the making for you?
I think I really believe in the power of entrepreneurship. I
Mhm.
mean, it's at the core of Carbon 13, but I always believed in the power and the positive potential impact of entrepreneurship. And I think smaller businesses tend to be more um, diverse, more open, more sort of less patriarchal, less difficult. That's not a black and white. There's a lot of startup founders that are, not necessarily nice people, but there's many that are working in a really good way. And I know many founders, both male and female, and in between, and everything in between and outside of that, that are doing great, that are building businesses that are really great for the people that work in those businesses, and that also care about their wider impact, even if they might not be a climate tech business, but they still care, right? And I think that change to a world where there's more entrepreneurial activity means also a world of higher levels of diversity, higher levels of equality, and so on. So yeah, that would be a wish that might happen.
No, that sounds wonderful. And I mean, I have to say, in my around me, a lot of people are just going through a lot of these crises as well. Of, just like, what am I doing? And I would like to offer my skill set to something that's really meaningful as well. And at the same time, also there's, I mean, a massive job crisis, right? With all the all that's going on with AI. So it's interesting to see a little bit more agency and like a little bit more entrepreneurship there too. So yeah. I always end with a question. So that the guest leaves a question for the listeners. So, do you think of a question that you would like the listeners to reflect on?
So it's not
So
just
you ask
because I'm listening.
questions.
They
So
do a
that
question from like the previous person that
yeah, no,
asked the
yeah,
question.
yeah. I mean,
Which
you
is
ask the question so the listeners can think about it.
okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, maybe the question that I would ask people is like, if you think about your buying behavior in general, and that's everything from the way you move around, as in like the car or bicycle or whatever you use, to the energy that you use, to the clothing that you buy and the sports equipment, and like, can you find a way to use a more local, I don't know, national European provider that is an alternative to one of the big five tech companies, one of the big 10 fast fashion companies, one of the big, whatever, 3 to 5 old school energy providers in your city, in your country. Um, and can you make that change this year? And can you make a change next year?
Love it.
One change.
Yeah. Let's go with that, and yeah, let's see how we then will affect that. Thank you so much, Michael. It was a really pleasure to talk to
You. Yeah, same. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
you. Thank you.